Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Munich Dialogues on Democracy. Welcome to everyone here in the theater, and welcome to all of you online who are just now joining us. We did watch 1.5 minutes of Yaël's TED Talk for those of you at home. The link is on our website, but I'll reference it, and we'll try to keep everybody at the same level. The partnership behind this program, as you all know, is the Yale Club of Germany and Munich's Amerikahaus. I'm Bartley Grosser-Richter, the current president of the Yale Club of Germany. So in the name of the team here at Amerikahaus and the Yale Club, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you very much for joining us. We are continuing our blockbuster programming in this mega election year, and tonight's topic is relevant all over the world. If you remember, so far this year we have spent an evening focused on the United States and Joe Biden's White House with Franklin Furr. And then we heard about angry populist politics all around the world with Ian Shapiro. And tonight, we're continuing in a similar vein. We'll be talking about polarization and defending democracy, but in the cybersphere. It's a huge honor to have with us tonight Yaël Eisenstat. As you saw, a former CIA officer and a diplomat, as well as White House advisor. And her TED Talk called Dear Facebook, This is How You Are Breaking Democracy, has had 113,000 views. She talks about, as you saw, realizing that she was losing the ability to engage with people who aren't like-minded, and how the idea of sitting down with her own compatriots was more stressful and difficult than sitting down with extremists and terrorists overseas. So she did something about it. She upended her career, and she shifted her focus, and is now trying to understand what is causing this trend toward extreme polarization at home. Her lessons apply to all of us, not just Americans. How has compromise become a dirty word? Yale warns us lies are more engaging online than truth. So as long as social media algorithms' goals are to keep us engaged, they will feed us the poison that plays to our worst instincts and human weaknesses. It's going to take all of us to fix this, and tonight she'll help us understand her ideas of what really is going on and what we can do to fight back. Our moderator tonight is very well known to our audience here in Munich. Richard Gutjahr is one of Germany's most renowned journalists. For 20 years, he worked at the German national broadcaster as both a presenter and behind the scenes, and he covered conflicts and crises all around the world. As a lecturer, he teaches journalism both in Europe and in the United States, and he's received numerous national and international awards for his work. But even more relevant to our evening tonight, he was the victim of online conspiracy theories and actually became himself fake news. He was bombarded by posts across several social media platforms accusing him of being a terrorist. As a background, what happened is by chance, he was in Nice on vacation. Was it 2016 Bastille Day? Yeah. And he happened to be when the terrorist truck plowed through the crowd and killed 86 people. And he was on a balcony and was able to film it and report it. And a year later, by chance, as many of us here will remember well, there was a shooting in Munich went on lockdown because there was a gunman in the shopping mall outside of town. And he was one of the first to arrive there and report on it. In a Kafkaesque situation, he found himself and his family maligned all over the world. It wasn't just a shitstorm, it was, as he calls it, a shit tsunami. So he understands the power that these algorithms have very, very well. Tonight we'll be using Slido.com. We will be taking, it's more of a fireside chat, we'll be taking your questions. So you can either, I think it comes up, scan the Slido sign, or you can go to Slido.com, and you at home also can go to Slido.com, #Amerikahaus, put up your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. I'm looking forward to a lively conversation. She was in Amsterdam, and I heard that the audience was fabulous, so you're on. Join me in giving a warm Munich willkommen to Yaël and Richard.
Yaël, it's a pleasure having you here, and I have so many questions. And let me just start with a few of them, and then I'll peek into my iPad and see what you guys are contributing. We're also streaming live to the audience at home or at the office or the home office or the office home. Whatever, whoever and wherever you're watching and joining us today, please feel invited to contribute to our conversation. So let me just ask you to begin with, because it's very unusual that an officer from the CIA and a diplomat and somebody who's like involved in all those diplomacy addresses social media at a time that many people have not done that and have not seen what was about to come. Can you share with us the moment when you kind of switched gear and saw that there's a train or something is approaching us, and that might be really, really dangerous, and nobody sees that danger?
Sure. Is this on? It is on.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. While it is true that the audience in Amsterdam was fantastic, I'm sure the audience here will be as well. Yeah, you know, I joined government before September 11th. I am old. And I spent years really in the early 2000s working in the field on counter-extremism issues. I spent a lot of time. I spent a few years in East Africa. And I'm giving this history. This will probably be the longest answer of the night. I promise I'll be more brief afterwards, but it really sets us up for what you were asking here.
No questions yet by the audience, so you have all the time in the world.
You know, during those few years, I spent about 2 years going back and forth, especially in Somali communities along the Somalia border, and really trying to understand, particularly in communities that were deemed susceptible to extremist messaging, what makes people susceptible to extremist messaging, and how can you actually almost get to them before that messaging sinks in. Some of us would call that like hearts and minds type work. It's spending a lot of time sitting, drinking tea, having conversations. I know it sounds so quaint and so cliche, but really getting to know someone. And it doesn't matter if you come from completely different worlds and different viewpoints. It was understanding each other, understanding what sort of messages, why they were vulnerable to extremist messaging, and how to at least offer other perspectives. So that is really where my world started professionally. And then fast forward to about 2014, 2015, and it just struck me. It really almost happened all at once that I had spent my career sitting down with people that in no way was it obvious that we would be able to have good conversations. I mean, I was this, at the time I had, you know, curly hair, Jewish woman with the Hebrew name, American, sitting along the Somalia border with like leaders and imams and sheikhs and actually having really good conversations, even if we didn't agree. And all of a sudden in the United States, I found I couldn't have conversations at all with people about hot-button issues if we didn't absolutely already agree to begin with. And that shocked me because, I mean, let's be honest, the United States has always been polarized. The idea that polarization in and of itself is new is not true. But this idea that it rose to a level where you actually have to hate someone if they don't share the same opinion as you, that just became incredibly dangerous. And so I started digging into really the very first thing I ever wrote before I actually admit to some parts of my past. The title sounds quaint now, but in 2015, the title in Time magazine was American Hate is a Bigger Threat Than Foreign Terrorism. And that was what I felt then, and I started digging in, and that led me to everything we're gonna talk about now. And it didn't mean that I think social media is the end-all be-all only reason we are where we are, but it was very clearly a hugely contributing factor.
Would you mind taking us back to the early days when, you know, like I think Obama was still in office, and when, you know, people got used to have conversations on Facebook, and so on. But something started to change. Take us back to the time you were working with the White House, you were advising politicians, you were like very much, you know, like involved into the political circle in Washington. How did the people react when you first addressed this kind of issue?
Sure. So I spent 2009 and 2010, I think it was those years, in the White House, actually as a national security advisor to then Vice President Biden, obviously currently president. And it was interesting, right, because Obama really did come in as this president who was the first one to use social media. He was that president that used Facebook, that used social media to campaign, to connect with younger people.
It was a time when everybody was kind of hyped about like bringing people together, sharing knowledge. Like it brings us closer. I think Mark Zuckerberg always still does now. He's changed his tone now, but he went around and said about like meaningful conversations, right?
Facebook
but that was the time, right?
For meaningful conversations.
Exactly.
But yes, people were very optimistic about social media at the time. And obviously there were other factors at play that once Obama got elected, some of the worst instincts of Americans, some Americans started coming out, right? Some of the more undertone racist feelings started bubbling more to the surface. But what became very clear was more and more you had ideas that had been really fringe becoming more and more mainstream. Ideas that always existed, they exist on the dark web, they exist in certain circles, but before social media, again, having been in the counter-extremism world for so long, it's a lot of work to actually recruit someone. You have to get to know their vulnerabilities. You have to understand if they're susceptible to your messages. Then you have to spend time gaining their trust. Then you have to start messaging to them in a way that they will receive it, so it plays on their vulnerabilities. It was a very actual intensive process to recruit someone, whether it's terrorist recruitment or extremist recruitment or white supremacy recruitment or any of these groups. And then it just was so clear to me that this was becoming easier and easier. Something was happening here. And the reality is the way, and I won't give the whole speech right now, I promise we'll unpack this throughout the next however many minutes. But the more I dug in, the more it was very clear. The way social media was working was that it was figuring out all your vulnerabilities, and it was messaging to you the exact same way I used to see in the analog world. But without that human that you didn't need that trusted person to spend all the time to recruit you anymore. The systems, the machines themselves were giving these tools to anybody who wanted it, and sometimes we're just doing it on their own without even a human intent to necessarily radicalize someone. So when I started using the word radicalizing to describe Americans, people were pretty upset because I had always spent my time worrying about threats abroad. The United States in a post-September 11th world only thought about threats from abroad. And I started saying, no, we're actually becoming our own worst enemy. We are being radicalized, not just online, but largely online.
You just mentioned 9/11. Would you say that in a way, like foreign actors and then even like the enemies within the same country have hijacked digital airplanes and drove them right into the nation's capital?
I might have to take that from you. That's a good way to describe it. So listen, there's different things at play. Coming into the 2016 election in the U.S.
I mean, I'm sorry, just want to explain the picture, because Facebook and YouTube and so on are American companies. So
100%.
Have they been instrumentalized in order to destroying democracies?
Yeah, so this is exactly what I was going to answer, because it's such an interesting way to paint that picture. Running up into the 2016 election, it really was a situation where we, U.S. companies, not just bred out of Silicon Valley, where I was actually raised, but also giving an incredibly, not just permissive legal structure, but subsidized by the US government essentially by being immunized from any accountability.
Section 230.
Oh yeah, we'll get into
also,
that.
you know, it's like a Gefängnisfreikarte, a prison-free card at Monopoly. Yes. No matter what is posted on Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever, the platforms are not responsible. They have a jail-free card for whatever is posted there. That's different in Germany or in Europe, but in America you can say and put on whatever they can monetize it even.
But not, I was going to say, not just what's posted on the platform. It's been interpreted to the point where they have a get-out-of-jail-free card for what their own tools do with that speech, which I'll get to. But I do want to get back to this foreign actor. So you have these U.S. companies. They're born and scaled out of the United States, and they are giving the exact same tools to foreign adversaries to engage in information warfare, which has always been a tool of great power conflict, and they are just giving it to them for free. The number one thing out of the authoritarian playbook, the first thing you do is control information. You make sure that you start ensuring that people don't know what to trust. You start planting more chaos wherever you see rifts in society. This is all out of an authoritarian playbook. You don't necessarily need to own the airwaves. You just need to know how to manipulate them to sow distrust, to pit people against each other, and that is exactly what Facebook in particular, and then other tech companies, handed, particularly Russia, ahead of the US election in 2016. Some would argue Brexit as well, with no accountability. And now, though, I don't think it's just a foreign adversary problem, because now everybody who wants to use these companies to manipulate the public, and again, let's just be very clear, I'm not just talking about somebody posting something online that I disagree with. I am talking about tools that actually recommend people, recommend somebody who goes online and looks up World Economic Forum. Some say that's a little gateway term straight into conspiracy theories, and especially anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. But some might say I'm actually literally want to look up the World Economic Forum. We've done experiments with some of my researchers. You go looking for World Economic Forum, the company itself, as recently as this year, we did these experiments this year, recommended conspiracy theories, QAnon groups, said you should look at this page, started sending people down to literally Nazi propaganda in the United States when our fake high school student looked up World Economic Forum. So the tools themselves are leading people down these paths that is not even necessarily what people are going online to look for to begin with. And they never, have any of you ever been asked by Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or X, what exactly do you want to get out of this experience? What is it you really want to look for as you're watching videos? What do you really want the next thing you watch? They don't ask you that. They recommend to you what they think you are going to want to watch. And it keeps showing up again and again. And so, yes, American companies have handed the most inexpensive, effective tools for propaganda and information warfare and manipulation of public trust to not just foreign adversaries, to any bad actors.
Having said that, isn't that a little bit hypocritical to now focus on TikTok and China, whereas you do not regulate your very own companies that way that you are now addressing TikTok with?
Yeah, so the TikTok one is really interesting. It is true. Why, if we really wanted to figure out how to create a healthier information ecosystem, and let's be very clear, I'm not anti-social media. I am not anti-tech. I just want to actually figure out where accountability lies for how these companies affect us with their own tools and their own business decisions. singling out TikTok while not fixing any of the issues that we have tons of research about, I do think it is highly problematic. What's interesting with the TikTok debate is, so Congress claims, it's interesting because a few senators that I do know are very smart in this space go into a private classified briefing and then come out and say, oh, well, now I'm convinced. So my thing on TikTok is, if there really is a national security threat, I think the American people deserve to see that transparently before you go ahead and decide you're going to ban it. I don't know if it is true. Like what they're saying is that the Chinese government itself is affecting how the algorithms are prioritizing information, have their fingers on the scale. Mm-hmm. I have seen no evidence to prove that that's true. But if there is evidence, then I do think the US government has to make that public. Otherwise, yes, we are giving a really big gift to Mark Zuckerberg and others by potentially banning their #1 competitor, TikTok.
Oh, that's always been the playbook, like with Mark Zuckerberg, way before we talked about like putting the finger on the scale and to manipulate the discussion in the US. Mark Zuckerberg always brought up China when Meta or Facebook was about to be broken up by the FTC. So they always said, no, we need the big company against China. So it comes in handy to use that as a shield, so to speak. But isn't it kind of, my question more is like, if you know how manipulative and how dangerous like social media, like TikTok could be for the Western democracies, why do not apply the same kind of regulations and oversight to your very own companies that are using the same tools and that have been proven to manipulate the discussions?
So you're preaching to the choir on this one.
I do. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's move on, because now this is really interesting. So with all your insights and with all your knowledge about what was going on back then already, how in the world did you end up at Facebook in the lion's den yourself as an employee?
Actually, it just occurred to me, I can blame Germany for this one. So, yeah, it just occurred to me considering where I'm sitting right now. So I had started digging into this issue, again, in about 2014, 2015. And I wrote this piece that I mentioned to you, really exploring what the different elements are that were starting to radicalize Americans, and started digging in more and more to how social media works. And before everyone knew what the word algorithm meant, how the algorithms themselves were creating the situation. And I was invited to come speak at Tech Open Air in Berlin that year.
Nice.
And so I went and spoke, and it was also a fireside chat, and we got a lot into, that was really about the core of that in, I think that was 2017 probably. The core of that, it was a post very dramatic election in the United States. And again, it sounds so simple, but my core message has always been, how do you engage with people who are not like-minded? Which is impossible to do in the United States right now, it feels like. And so I started really digging in on technology and started speaking up, especially about Facebook, because that was the biggest player at the time. And in some cases, still is. I mean, Facebook is everywhere, even if in the United States only people my age and older use it.
Facebook or Meta controls 3 billion screens around the world. 3 billion with Messenger, with WhatsApp, and so on.
It's also the gateway to the internet in many countries.
Especially in Africa. And
and happy to explain that if people are interested. But so I was speaking at this conference in Berlin, and and then I went on a tech podcast while I was in Berlin and started talking exactly about why I thought Facebook really had questions they needed to answer. And then they called me. So
they were listening to that podcast. That's
possibly.
Great. Awesome.
So thank you, Germany, maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe.
And they started talking to me about a potential role. And what's really interesting is there was this big U.S. Senate hearing in 2018, the big one where Mark Zuckerberg...
Analytica?
Yes, the Cambridge Analytica Mark Zuckerberg hearing. It went on for hours. And they were already talking to me, trying to recruit me at that time. 1 minute after that hearing ended, they called me and they said, we've created... And I had just listened to Mark Zuckerberg spend 5 hours saying, we know we have to do better.
We will get back to that question because you never answered the question.
Yes, and we'll get back to that question. And elections, elections, elections. We have to. He said it so many times. And then they called me 1 minute after the hearing ended and said, we've created this new role just for you. We want you to come be our head of global elections integrity. It's very hard to say no to that.
You had that on your business card, head of global elections integrity, Facebook, with the logo?
I have it on the offer letter that they sent to me. That is what they called me and offered me. And for somebody who was fighting for what I was fighting for, you have to say yes to that. You have to say, okay, I'm going to at least try.
You tried to change the system from the inside, the system Facebook.
I didn't go in thinking, at this point I was old enough to know, I'm not going to go in and change this entire company single-handedly. You see lots of people in the tech world think that they're going to single-handedly save the world. I didn't think that was going to happen. But I did think if they meant it, and by the way, in all my interviews I said, don't hire me if you don't mean it. I'm not begging for this role.
Of course.
But if they empowered me to at least, I told them the first thing I'm going to do is dig in to say, how could this have happened to begin with? Because they put me on the political ad side. How was it so easy, not just for Russians to buy ads in rubles? They paid in rubles for U.S. political advertising.
They didn't even hide it. They did it in plain sight.
In plain sight. But to me, the bigger question was not just, how were the Russians able to do this? To me, the bigger question was, why were we so susceptible to so much of this messaging? That was the question I wanted to dig into more. And so I told them, only hire me if you mean it. And I went in 2018 to what was supposed to be this role. And on the second day there, they took away the title and changed the entire role.
On the second day, wow.
I had not made a mistake yet, because day one was just orientation.
Nice. But they have nice food there in Menlo Park.
Great food.
Anyway, so let's recap. So there you are at Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, true story, has a business card that says, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO, bitch. And you had your business card not even printed with the title Head of Global Elections Integrity. And the very next day, that title evaporated.
Yeah, the very next day.
Why? How?
That's the one question I can't answer. I cannot answer why they hired me, because for the life of me, I don't know. Some assume they were trying to silence a critic. Do you know me at all?
Oh, is it
like I'm not one
is that kind of a catch and?
Oh yeah, that's something that happens a lot.
Catch and kill thing.
Make an offer that a critic can't refuse, drown them in NDAs, and then they can never talk about it again when they leave. On public stage. Yeah.
Oh, I see. How long have you been there? Shy of?
So I was only there just short of 6 months, but again, the difference is they didn't hire someone right out of school. They hired someone with a whole career behind me. So I did not take the severance. I did not sign the non-disparagement. And this, to me, is one of the biggest threats to a true open democracy and the future of what that's going to look like. And there's no way I was going to leave and just suddenly stop working on it.
It's interesting because there are a few of these people that tell the same story. Tristan Harris, who has seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix. You should definitely check that out.
I'm in it. Let's see if you can spot me.
Exactly. So, so he pretty much did the same thing at Google, and he also was he had a fancy title like you had, like head of ethics or something. Ethics at Google. I mean, okay. Okay, let's move on. So you have been to Facebook. Can you describe us, have you had some insights during those your short term that you have learned to understand Facebook and their motivations better?
Absolutely. So first off, the amount of people that worked at the company that truly, and good people, that truly were there because they believed they were changing the world. There were so many people I came across who, good people, believed they were changing the world. These are not bad people. Had zero understanding of what it meant to change the world. Had never spent a day outside of the Silicon Valley, or had never studied or worked in any global conflict or any situation outside of tech. And they were all scrambling to do their work, but Facebook was brilliant at the time at convincing everybody that it's a flat company. You can come in at any level and change the world. And you could see nobody truly understood that nothing they were going to try to do there, as long as it changed the potential for the company to grow and scale at astronomical speeds, they were not going to succeed. And that was interesting. People didn't fully get that. There were two things that made it very clear that I was not going to last. The first thing I did was try to understand and ask. I just asked. We have these like forums. It's almost like the internal Facebook, the Facebook for employees internally. And I just asked, I'm curious why we don't apply the same rules to political advertising, same fact-checking rules that we do to the rest of Facebook. And all of these engineers and data scientists got really excited that I, the new global head of elections integrity, was asking this question. And they said, you're right, we should be doing this. And they started building it out. This is how we'll do it. And we put together a whole plan. It was scalable, it was cheap, it was technically achievable on how to just make sure political ads did not lie about how to vote, where to vote, when to vote, any of these basic voter suppression tactics. And everyone was really excited that, oh, finally, there's somebody here who wants us to do this. They figured out how to build it. That was the end for me. It got so sent up so quickly and denied immediately. So that is what I learned more than anything. There are so many people who are excited if given the opportunity to do the right thing, but if it goes against that company's ability to either scale, or in this case, and this is, I don't want to get political in this talk, but had we fact-checked political ads in 2018 and 2019, we would have angered certain very powerful political candidates. And that is the other thing, that it doesn't matter how smart you are at the company. There are political decisions made at the top to protect their power with certain leaders and to protect their ability to scale. And nothing, whether it's because it's the right thing to do, I'm not the only one who said there's just been so much exposed in recent years. People who were trying to figure out how to make sure that on Instagram, harmful content wasn't being served to teenagers, axed. People who, over and over again, people who were trying to put in protective measures could not succeed. And that is the biggest learning. It is possible. It is not too hard. It is always a decision from the top.
There's been another remarkable Senate hearing in the beginning of this year. It went on for 4, 5, or 6 hours even. All the big heads, big shots of social media were present, like Evan Spiegel from Snapchat, and I think the head of Reddit or so, he actually had to be subpoenaed to come. And there was many remarkable situations in that hearing, but one really made me really chill. That was when Senator Kennedy addressed Evan Spiegel of Snapchat and said, "You guys, you are not companies. You are actually countries, you're states. You have you have the power and the money and the resources of states. And then he said something even more remarkable. He said, no matter what we are trying, both sides of the aisle, to regulate you, you prevent that from happening. As if the laws are not being made by democratic elected representatives anymore, but by the heads of these mega companies in Silicon Valley. How is that possible? A senator said literally, you are making the laws, not us.
Well, that's where I actually have to be really disappointed in my own government. I just have to say.
But how is that? Please explain to us how is that possible? We know the principle of lobbying, but even lobbyists have not that kind of power, do they? How is that working?
The amount of money and power at stake with who controls information and who controls the internet is something we have never seen before in history. And it's not just about lobbying. It is, first and foremost, it is very complicated. I don't want to pretend like it's not. There were other really incredible moments in that hearing as well. But on the one hand, he's not wrong. On the other hand, I would say, but US Congress, this is your job to fix this. Let me give an example that just sheds a light on what you just said. I don't personally believe that Mark Zuckerberg set out to say, I want to sway an election this direction or another. I don't think he sat down and said, if I do this, this is going to end up causing harm to teenage girls. I don't think that was the intent. But the mere possibility that this man has enough power that he could put his finger on the scale and completely tip an election at any time, that kind of power should never reside in one person's hand. And so I have to be honest. I am really disappointed in my own government. Europe is way farther ahead than we are on figuring how to rein in some of this. The tech companies have been masters at convincing governments that anything they do is going to break the whole internet, that anything they do will go against the First Amendment, that anything they do, they've also very good at making everyone believe it's too hard, you don't understand what you're talking about. It is true. It is very hard for a sitting U.S. senator to understand exactly how the algorithms or recommendation engines work. But that is not a reason to not figure out what federal data privacy should look like.
Politicians don't know how drugs are working.
Exactly.
And we must regulate drugs before they are being sold.
Right. Exactly. So that's my point when earlier I said, I can tell you it is possible. It is not too difficult. Some of these solutions are scalable. It is always a business decision from the top. And right now, the economic and political incentive structures are not aligning with, first of all, at all with self-regulation. So many people say, well, you don't want to squash innovation. You have to let the companies self-regulate. At least Europe understands that we're past that point. But the economic incentive structures in the US right now are just not pushing these companies in any way, as long as, I've said it a million times, many people have said it a million times, I'm going to repeat myself in case any of you have not heard this yet. As long as companies continue to have free rein to hoover up all of our human behavioral data, and I don't mean what zip code you live in or what city you live in, I mean literally the things that make you tick as a human being, what your interests are, what exactly makes you tick, what is it that's going to make you click on the next thing, what other website did you visit today? Oh, she's probably pregnant because she doesn't even know yet, but she did these 4 things. Her period app told her this.
Facebook pays and buys data that is not on Facebook, and it literally pays, they had admitted it, like other companies to send like the data of women of their periods and from period tracking apps. So Facebook owns that data.
It is all
Or
connected.
if you are, sorry to say, but we're in Europe, we know about things like that, like what porn site you visit. Facebook and Google buy those data, your browsing history, goes directly to Facebook and to Google. They know what pages you have visited, even if you're not on Facebook.
And as long as these companies are allowed to use our human behavioral data, this is how they make money, but I want to put a real fine point on this. It's not just that they're using our data to target us with ads. It's so much more than that. What they're doing is
they're reading your minds.
Up. I don't go that far, but yes, you could say. I mean, they do. I used to joke that they knew me better than I knew myself. They hoover up our data. They create the personalization and customizable experience for you so that everything you do online feels great. It's customized to you. You're enjoying your experience. There's no friction. You can scroll right to the next thing. But what has happened with that? It has been proven time and time again. That is why they have to keep you on the screen. If you code an algorithm, and let's be very clear, every algorithm at its beginning is coded by a human being and is given a goal. Because Mark Zuckerberg will have you believe it's just the algorithm. If the algorithm is told that its goal is to keep you on its platform as long as possible, which they have to do, that's how they continue to gather up your data, it has figured out that it needs to give you more and more emotionally charged information. Otherwise, you're not going to click on the next thing. And there's no friction, nothing to slow it down, because if it slows it down, you might actually stop and think, wait a minute, is this really true? So it's a frictionless experience, and what they are doing with that data, obviously, is personalizing your experience so that then they can go to advertisers and sell advertisers the idea that they can perfectly target you. And fine, if they want to target me with purple shoes instead of red shoes because they know I like purple, wonderful. They're using those same tools for political speech. They're using those same tools for harmful content. Those same tools are connecting young men who have been completely radicalized on the so-called manosphere with, like, how to make a bomb. Those same tools are being used for far more things than whether or not I should be targeted with red shoes or purple shoes. And this is why Europe is so far ahead of us, because as long as the US refuses to have federal data privacy laws, as long as we refuse to say selling people's data the way, although we are actually possibly about to pass legislation about data brokers, which is so exciting, this will continue. This will continue.
Okay, we should come to, I now have a few very good questions, and we should finally address the elephant in the room, because this was just the beginning. Let's be clear about this, because we have the next advancement in digitization right in front of us. It's already happening in light speed, which is the era of AI and the synthetic social media, whereas the content will not be only created by humans, but by machines. So everything that we just talked about is just the beginning of something that can be even bigger when machines find out not only how to choose who gets to see what, but also by creating the content tailored to the darkest person that you can address in every one of us, to keep the engagement and the money flowing for advertising. So here's our next question, our first question from you. No name, so I just read the question. How much worse is generative AI gonna make the whole situation? Or is the potential Gen AI helps us to alleviate online polarization?
So this is obviously one of the most important questions right now, right? Well, first of all, I'm glad that this person actually said generative AI, because people use the word AI to describe everything right now. When I'm going to talk about AI tonight, there will be two things I am really focusing on. The AI that powers algorithms, that is not new. That is basically everything we've already been talking about, and what you just described as generative AI. Also, I realize I'm very dark and I'm going to depress you all by the end of the night. I promise I do still believe that there is hope to fix some of this. So lots of people, I'm going to give a bit of an American context here, right? We have a really difficult, heated election coming up this year. Plus, there's over 70 other elections around the world at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's these same platforms that are playing in all of these elections.
Oh, we have elections here in the EU.
Yeah, so
US, EU.
What generative AI is going to introduce into this already difficult landscape is there's two elements to what you said. When we talk about generative AI, we're talking about ChatGPT, we're talking about deepfakes, we're talking about synthetic audio, we're talking about content that is created by the AI itself. In terms of, first and foremost, let's be very clear. With generative, the first people who are always harmed when there's a really new technology like this are going to be women and marginalized community. Like, let's just be very clear. Generative AI will harm women first and foremost. We already see it because it is becoming easier and cheaper than ever to create fake pornography.
It's a big thing in the US high schools already, because it's so easy. You can just put the pictures of anybody, your classmate, and put it on a...
And unfortunately, if women or other marginalized communities are the first ones targeted, that's not the first thing that makes legislators feel like they need to do anything about it. That said, which is terrible but true, people are really worried, how is this going to affect the election landscape? I don't know that generative AI tools are going to be sophisticated enough to necessarily convince voters one way or another. That's actually not my concern. I do believe they will make personalized targeting much more sophisticated in the future, because not only can I now, as somebody who wants to get a message out to you, let's be very clear. When I wanted to fact check political ads back in 2018, it's not because I wanted to be the arbiter of truth. I'm bringing this back because it's connected. Mm-hmm. It's because I knew that in political ads, this was content that not only was Facebook making money from, but that advertisers could micro-target to people. So the two of you sitting in the front row, maybe you live across the street from each other, but you are going to get two very different versions of the same politician's ads based on what's going to be more interesting to each of you. So how are the two of you going to be able to come together and debate and discuss what politicians are saying to you when you're not even getting the same version of truth? And that, I knew that in 2018 when I was at Facebook, and that's why I tried to fix that. And now with generative AI, it's going to be possible to not only create that politician's voice, but really personalize it to you based on everything you've ever done online. Like if I go to ChatGPT right now and I say, write a short speech in the voice of Yaël Eisenstat, because I've spoken so much publicly and because I've written so much, it is unbelievable what it will write. Like it will write in my style, in my voice, which is great. By the way, I am not against the concept of how much good can come from some of this. But it also makes me realize, wow, so now if somebody else says, write an ad that will appeal to Yaël Eisenstat, like that, this tool will give them that ability.
So you can sell anything to anyone because you are hitting the right tone to each and every person. And it costs you nothing because it is done by a machine.
Yes, but to be clear, I am not sure that this year that is going to be developed enough to really affect this election. What I am concerned about is that the mere awareness that these tools exist, The fact that we all know that deep fakes exist, that synthetic audio exists, that ChatGPT exists, will make us not know what to trust at all. And going back to how I started this talk, the first page out of an authoritarian's playbook is to make sure that you don't trust your institutions, is to just completely destroy trust. Trust in media, trust in civil society, trust in your institutions. And that is actually my bigger fear. Any politician, and we've already seen this, but any politician who gets caught doing something terrible now on tape, no one says on tape anymore, but on audio, on video, you know they're going to say, that's not me, that's fake. And it doesn't matter if people will be able to authenticate it. It doesn't matter if the media will be able to prove that it's true. If you are already primed to believe that person, if they say that is not true, A, you're likely to believe them, or B, you're likely to say, I don't trust anything. And that, to me, is way more dangerous for a democracy when people say, I don't trust anything anymore.
So Kellyanne Conway was actually right when she coined that phrase, alternative facts?
No, there's no such thing as an alternative fact. A fact is a fact. I will not give in to a Kellyanne Conway quote on this stage. But yeah, so this is my bigger concern with generative AI right now, and it will... New technologies are always adopted first by bad actors, right? It will be used to manipulate people. It will be used for all of the things that we're talking about here. On the opposite side, though, it's the first time where I think we might actually be able to convince lawmakers that these tools do not get the same free pass that we gave to social media for the past 10 years. We need to actually get ahead of this to put in some form of transparency and guardrails and accountability.
By the way, I recently spoke to a former colleague, I might even say. She also worked for Facebook a long time ago, Frances Hogan, the whistleblower. And she made me aware, she talked to me for being a journalist, and she said, did you know that the Llama AI created by Meta is already out in the open in the so-called dark web, because it's an open AI system, and so you can actually change and manipulate it. So you can use it for the good, but you can also do very bad things with it. And yeah, maybe one should try to contain it in a way, and that is certainly the task of government. So we have another one which has been voted on very to the top. What is the best way to combat and hopefully neutralize troll farms and bots?
So I am never quite sure. I never assume that everybody knows what every term means. And you definitely know what bots and troll farms are all about from some of your own personal experience. So bots are not all bad. So this is, again, where it gets complicated, right? Like, bots are not inherently necessarily bad. Because bots can be used to surface, for example, accurate voting information. Bots can be used to tell you actually your polling station is still open, or they're not in and of themselves bad. What is bad, though, is when you have a troll farm sitting in anywhere. It could be in some kid's basement, it could be in a foreign country, it could be anywhere. Engaging in manipulative behavior, whether it is to inundate you with false information, whether it is to amplify bad information, whether it is to attack somebody. And part of how you can combat that, the companies are not incentivized to do it on their own. They're just not. I mean, when Elon Musk bought X, or Twitter at the time, he said that was the first thing he was going to do. He was going to get rid of all the bots. I don't know if any of you still use that platform. The amount of bots that come at me anytime I say anything is insane. I think I don't have the perfect solution for regulation on actual bots. I do not believe that ending anonymity online is the answer. And I know a lot of people want that to be the answer. Anonymity online, there are pros and cons to it. And some of the pros for anonymity, this is where nothing is black and white. I'm never gonna give you the perfectly satisfying answer to some of these questions. Anonymity is really important for some people, dissidents, who, if they aren't anonymous online, are going to be targeted by government.
Oh, we just talked about the women. Me too.
Correct. So the question is, first of all, bots are also feeding off of certain data, and this is where data privacy will help. If we could get, you guys are far more ahead of us on this than we are in the US. But I don't have the perfect answer on how to end bots and trolls. I do, though, will tell you this. If trolls are not incentivized, some people do this just because they're jerks. But what we didn't really get into here is what is the incentives for this? A lot of the people out there who are engaging in the worst kind of online activity, it's not because it's what they believe. It's because that's how they are either monetizing. That is how they are getting more followers to their cause, which they can then make money off of it. That's how they're gaining influencer status, because influencer status is profitable. All of these have some sort of incentive at the end of the day. And so some people, I will say for bots and troll farms, if it is being used by a foreign actor, every country has the right to protect their national borders against foreign adversaries using troll farms and bots to manipulate their elections. The US hasn't done a great job of that, but every country has that right. But if you start really tackling the systemic issues of how people are monetizing, how people are profiting, you will start to change the incentive structures for how people engage online. I know that wasn't a perfect answer to ending bots. I apologize.
We have one more highly voted question, which is also anonymous. People talk about filter bubbles. Some academics criticize this, saying it overstates and is overstated, and people do choose what media to consume. Your view?
Sure. So filter bubbles, this was coined by, I'm pretty sure it was Eli Pariser who coined this. Yeah. Full disclosure, he's a friend of mine. But the concept of a filter bubble, right, is that you're going online and you're really only seeing content of people that you agree with. And there's academic studies that prove it and academic studies that say it's false. Also, let's be very clear. It is very difficult in this day and age to truly understand the research around any of these topics because of how much research has been influenced by the industry or paid for by the industry. So I would look at Facebook's own internal documents that were leaked by Frances Haugen, because they had some of their own studies showing how so-called filter bubbles were working. To me, I want to be very clear. I am not saying that every single person who uses social media has the same exact experience. I am not saying everybody is radicalized. I am not saying that every teenager is harmed. But that's not the point. If you have 100 million people using social media and only 1% is radicalized to go do something violent in the real world or to go do some act of, whether it's a mass shooter, whether it's a terrorist, whether it's whatever it is, that's what we're supposed to be protecting against. So I want to start before I say whether filter bubbles are true or not. I do believe that filter bubbles are real. I have seen it. I've seen it both inside the company. It doesn't mean it's real for everybody. Some people go online and they use certain habits to really try to engage and read from all different sort of sources, but that is you have to be intentional to do that. You have to be intentional to say, I am going to purposely look up this news site and that news site. Or I want to make sure that I have a diverse set of friends online, or I'm following a diverse set of viewpoints. That is not what is happening for many people who are going online and being driven in certain directions. filter bubbles exist. It doesn't mean it exists for everybody. And I am concerned about the percentage of people who are affected in a way that either harms democracy, that undermines trust, that go and engage in actually anti-democratic behavior. I mean, we haven't talked at all about the ultimate result of everything I'm talking about, which was in plain sight, and that was the January 6th insurrection in the United States. That same TED Talk that you saw the first 90 seconds of, which I'm going to be really rude and say, actually 2 million views. On YouTube, it's only 100,000 views. But if you watch the last 90 seconds of it, and that was written a full year before the January 6th insurrection, I spell out exactly how, because of the Stop the Steal movement and the extremist and the election lies that were not just being told online, but that Facebook's own algorithms were amplifying, and that specifically Facebook, because that's where I'd work, but also because it was the most prominent actor in this in the moment, because of the way people were actually being recommended into QAnon groups, the way you had people going online being fed a steady stream of election lies and then being said, you might be interested in this group. And that group happened to be one of these groups that was planning to show up on January 6th and commit acts of violence. I end that talk with saying there will possibly be post-election violence because of this, and nobody was talking about that yet. So many of the people who showed up at the Capitol in the United States on January 6th and engaged in violent acts of insurrection were not just radicalized online, they were connected to other people. They planned in plain sight on Facebook. They planned to show up and engage in violence. This forget everything else we're talking about. How can that be okay in a democracy to have a company who is also, they took money for political ads that were engaging in lies. They were profiting off of these things being amplified. And their own tools were not just connecting people, their own tools generated some of the pages themselves for extremists. You cannot tell me that is just third-party speech that should be protected under Section 230. I'm sorry, I forgot what the question is, but I realized, I want to make sure we get to the real heart of this. And right now, these companies have backslid on all of these policies. They've fired so many of their trust and safety people. YouTube and Facebook and Meta now, just this year, just several months ago, said, we are no longer going to say that lies about the 2020 US election violate our policies. Why? Why would you reverse that? That literally led straight to an insurrection. Those same lies are going to be used to prime people for this 2024 election. So if the person they think should win does not, there is nothing that I have seen to imply that these companies have learned their lesson and are going to ensure that they themselves do not help fuel violence again. I'm sorry, I forgot the question, but I wanted to make sure to really, this is not just, these have really serious consequences, and they know it.
Maybe coming to the end of our conversation, which basically is touching the surface of everything that we're facing these days. What would be your message to our audience here at the Amerikahaus in Munich or at home at one of the screens watching us right now? What would you say is our very own agency in all of this? We have talked about the responsibility and the lack of responsibility of Meta and of Mark Zuckerberg, of Google, Elon Musk, and all those people. We've talked about the incapabilities of politicians and the system, how it's been manipulated by lobbyists and by money and by influence in the political circles? What is our own responsibility? How can we fight against all these powers that be?
So often these conversations contribute to people feeling helpless, right? Like what am I supposed to do against such power? I'm actually really encouraged with the amount of, first and foremost, awareness is the first thing that has to happen before you can demand change. And I'm sorry to say, this is an industry that's not going to be changed in 6 months or a year. A fight this big is going to take years to course correct. But you have agency. First and foremost, you don't have to understand how an algorithm works. You don't have to understand how political targeting works. You don't have to understand how data brokers work. You just have to be able to say, I know there is enough research out there that this is harming our kids, that this is harming our democracy. I demand that my lawmakers do something about it. That is as detailed as the public needs to be, because it's up to the lawmakers to figure out how to do it. But I know in the US, lawmakers are not going to take something up until their constituents tell them it is a priority. So first of all,
call your congressman.
If you are an American in the audience, call your congressperson. But it is actually a really critical point. I am very encouraged by how many people, like if you look at the debate, especially for parents who are very aware that this is affecting their children, and you have enough people and research out there now explaining to parents why and how this is affecting their children. And that is a very powerful group. And that is why in the US, our first tech regulation, will separate from TikTok, will probably be something around protecting children online. You have first of all, the ability to influence your lawmakers. Second of all, people don't want to be told that they were wrong, that they were stupid, that it's their own fault, which, by the way, is much of what the tech industry wants you to believe. But when people finally understand that, no, you were actually manipulated. Like the fact that your uncle ended up becoming a QAnon believer.
Your uncle too?
No,
okay.
Oddly enough, I haven't had that personal experience, thank goodness, but I have a lot of friends who have. And once you start to understand, it's not that you were stupid for believing this thing that you fell for online. You were manipulated. This system used everything about you to feed you this steady stream of lies. Then people get upset. People don't want to be manipulated. So I also think people understand more and more that there are healthier ways to engage with technology. I do think you're starting to see proposals out of people like, I know that Jonathan Haidt is advocating right now for phone-free schools. That would be a pretty big change, right? But you cannot put this at the individual parent level. I want to be very clear about this. Because to say to a parent, it is your job to decide if your child should or should not have a smartphone.
Or the teachers.
Right now, there are schools I have learned in the US where the teachers have actually give their assignments via Instagram. I don't even understand that, but if that's what's happening, then that child is going to be left out. Or children, you can't tell children, like, all of your friends are doing this, but you can't do it, because then they're going to be left out from it. It has to be a school-wide thing. It has to be something more than putting all the responsibility on the individual parent. But I think people are waking up and saying, I don't want this machine to dominate us anymore, and that's where I become hopeful. You do have the agency to advocate for some of these changes. And I know that doesn't feel wholeheartedly satisfying, but I'm encouraged by how many more people are aware of this now.
By the way, when we talk about our children should not do that and phone-free schools, I sometimes wish we all would learn to leave those machines more often at home. Thank you very much. Yaël Eisenstat, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. No, you can sit there. This is 1 second. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It makes me want to go home and click on a bunch of things to confuse them.
Oh, that's another thing you can do. You can obfuscate by just clicking on everything. Then it doesn't know what to send you.
So I'm not
anymore.
just get puppies and ski accidents. Yeah. Okay. So before we go, I just want to thank the team at Amerikahaus for making us feel so welcome, and for the professional tech guys in the back. You are fabulous. Thank you. And of course, I want to thank you. I want to thank our community, to everybody who comes to our events, who watches our events online, who donates to our events to make them possible. Thank you so much. If you want to know what we're doing and you haven't done it yet, you can sign up on our website, dialoguesondemocracy.com, and that just gets you the emails so you know what our next event is. And finally, depending on where you are, this is where I'm going to start banging my gong this year, please make sure you are registered to vote. The European parliamentary elections are in June, so if you're a European, you can exercise your right. And if you are an American citizen, votefromabroad.org is a nonpartisan website that can help make sure that you are registered, and there are actually people here tonight, and if you have questions, they can help you with that also. So we do have a bar tonight if you want to have a drink with us, and thank you very much for coming and engaging, and hope to see you again in May. Thank you, guys.